They told me house hunting was supposed to be fun, exciting, the start of a new life. But no one warned me about the blue sunflower. No one mentioned the way the petals seemed to move when you weren't looking. And no one told me what happens when you step inside. I used to love the smell of fresh paint. There's something clean about it, sharp, promising. Even when I was a kid, I loved the idea of newness, of peeling away plastic from screens, of opening a box, and being the first to breathe its air. So when I finally saved enough to leave my crappy apartment behind, I thought house hunting would be my victory lap, the culmination of every miserable shift and overtime hour I'd ever suffered through. The first 2 houses were exactly what I expected. Clean carpets, nervous realtors, that faint, underlying odor of staged furniture that tries too hard to smell like someone actually lives there. But the third one was different. I knew something was wrong the moment we pulled up to the curb. It wasn't the condition of the house itself. Structurally, it looked fine. Brick exterior, neatly trimmed hedges, a little swing on the porch that creaked softly in the breeze. It was that goddamn logo nailed to the "For Sale" sign out front. Bright, shimmering blue. Not the color of denim or sky, but something colder, wrong, like the hue of a bruise healing incorrectly. And in the center of that awful blue, the outline of a sunflower, its petals flared unnaturally wide, almost like teeth. "Local company?" the realtor said casually, following my gaze. "Sunflower Realty. They pop up now and then. Great deals. Great deals. Right. Because nothing says bargain like branding your business with a nightmare flower." Still, the practical part of my brain won over. I'd spent months hunting online. Prices were skyrocketing, rentals were a scam, and this house, this stupid, perfectly normal-looking suburban home, was actually within my budget. So I stepped through the door. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was inside. Not cozy, quiet, not peaceful, hollow. Like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something. The floorboards under my feet didn't creak, even though they looked old. The air didn't smell like dust or mildew. Actually, it didn't smell like anything. "This place has been empty for a while," the realtor said, giving me that tight, too friendly smile salespeople wear like a badge. "But the structure's solid, good bones, great starter home." I wandered through the rooms. Living room, kitchen, 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths. It should have been perfect. Should have. But with every step I took, I felt it more. That pressure, like standing under deep water. Every sound was muffled. Even my footsteps seemed muted, as though the floor was swallowing them. And then I found the room upstairs. Second door on the right. At first glance, it was just another bedroom. Peeling wallpaper, empty closet, single window overlooking the overgrown backyard. But in the far corner, almost blending into the pale, flaking walls, was something else. Another sunflower, painted directly onto the drywall. But this one wasn't blue, it was black. Thick, dark brush strokes radiating outward from a gaping, empty center. Whoever painted it hadn't been careful. Drips of black streaked the wall below it like something had oozed from the flower itself. I don't know how long I stood there staring at it. The edges of the petals seemed to ripple slightly in the weak sunlight, like they were being blown by a wind I couldn't feel. "Unique, isn't it?" the realtor said behind me, her voice flat now. That cheery tone from earlier was gone, replaced with something else, something distant, like she was reading off a script. Previous owner was artistic. I should have left right then. Any sane person would have. But I thought about my empty apartment, the cracked pipes, the peeling plaster in the bathroom ceiling. I thought about the way my paycheck vanished, into rent every month, about the leering grin of my landlord, and then I thought about that price again, almost too good to be true. So I signed. The papers felt heavy in my hand as I scrawled my name across each line. The ink looked darker than normal, like it was sinking into the paper, bleeding through to something beneath. "Congratulations," the realtor said, her voice regaining that brittle, rehearsed enthusiasm. "You're officially a homeowner." The last thing I saw before she left was the glint of the blue sunflower logo on the stack of documents. The first night in the house was when the real trouble started. It began with the shadows. They moved when they shouldn't have. The lamp by my bed would flicker, casting shapes across the walls that didn't belong to me or my furniture. At first, I told myself it was just nerves. New house, new neighborhood, strange creaks settling. But then I started hearing the whispers. They didn't come from the vents or the windows or the corners of the empty rooms. They came from the sunflower, that black dripping shape upstairs. It spoke. Not in words I could understand. It was more like a feeling, a whisper pressed against the skin of my mind, curling around my thoughts like vines. I stopped sleeping, in that room by the third night. But it didn't help. No matter where I went in the house, the feeling followed me. I'd catch glimpses of things moving just out of sight, reflections in the mirrors that weren't mine, and always, that faint sticky sound like something wet slapping gently against drywall. I started having dreams about the blue sunflower logo, except in the dreams, it wasn't a logo anymore. It was a door. And behind that door, I could hear something breathing. It wasn't until the fifth night that I finally snapped. I woke up to the sound of humming. Soft, tuneless, distant, coming from upstairs. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I crept up the stairs barefoot, each step colder than the last. The humming got louder the closer I got to that room. When I opened the door, the sunflower was gone. In its place was a hole, not a hole through the wall, but in it. Like the flower had peeled itself open, revealing a tunnel of dripping black, petals curling inward into endless wet darkness. And from somewhere deep inside that tunnel, something hummed, something hungry. I don't remember running back downstairs. I don't remember grabbing my keys, or how I managed to get my shoes on without breaking my own ankles from panic. I just remember the feeling of that hum buzzing behind my eyes, vibrating through the marrow of my bones. I slept in my car that night, parked 3 streets away. I tried to call the realtor the next day. Disconnected. I drove past the office she claimed to work for. Empty. Boarded windows, old flaking paint, graffiti curling like ivy across the locked glass doors. No one I talked to in the neighborhood had ever heard of Sunflower Realty. I checked the paperwork I'd signed, flipping page after page, my hands shaking. But the more I looked, the more I realized something was wrong. The signatures were mine, but they didn't look like mine. Each letter of my name seemed warped, stretched unnaturally like something else had guided my hand. And that price? That amazing, too good to be true price? There was no record of it in my bank account. No withdrawal, no deposit. It was like I'd given them something else entirely. That night, when I tried to sleep in my car again, I caught a glimpse of something in the rear-view mirror, a petal. Thin blue, shimmering faintly in the light of the distant street lamps. They were following me, and I still didn't know what the hell they wanted. 2 days later, I met Caleb. I hadn't eaten or slept properly in almost a week. My hands trembled as I walked into a dingy little diner at the edge of town, just looking for something hot to shove into my stomach before I completely lost my mind. He was sitting 2 booths down, old army jacket, worn boots, heavy shadows under his eyes like someone who knew bad things on a first-name basis. "You bought one of their houses, didn't you?" he said before I even sat down. His voice was gravel and ashtrays. I stared at him. "What the hell are you talking about?" He didn't smile, didn't even blink. Just reached into his coat pocket and slid something across the chipped formica, tabletop toward me. A photograph, black and white, faded around the edges like it had spent years in someone's wallet. It was a picture of a house, not unlike mine. And in the front yard, nailed to the signpost, was that blue sunflower logo. Except, in this photo, the sunflower looked open, like a blooming mouth, and standing just at the edge of the porch was something wrong, something tall, impossibly thin, its features blurred, as if the film itself had recoiled from capturing its shape. "Whatever's in that house of yours," Caleb said, his voice low, "it doesn't stay locked up forever." I swallowed. My mouth was dry. "What do they want?" He leaned back. "Not what. Who?" I didn't understand then, not fully, but I would. Soon, very soon, and by then it might be too late to run. I thought I was alone in this nightmare, but the truth is I was just the latest in a long line of fools. The blue sunflower wasn't just a symbol, it was a trap. And the worst part? Some people never get out. I didn't eat the food at that diner. I don't even remember ordering. After Caleb slid that worn, cracked photograph across the table, I just sat there, staring, feeling my heartbeat in my teeth. Outside the smudged window, the town moved like nothing was wrong. Minivans rolled past. A couple of kids in hoodies laughed near the corner store. The whole world pretended that nothing unnatural was coiling behind the perfectly painted front doors of their neighborhoods. Caleb sat across from me, weathered and patient, like a man who'd done this before, like someone used to people breaking in front of him. I finally found my voice. "Who are you?" He shrugged. "Someone who survived." His eyes told a different story. They were pale around the irises, not with age, but something else. Something sick. You don't get eyes like that unless you've seen something up close that doesn't belong in this world. And from the way he never let his hand drift far from the inside of that army coat, I knew he was armed. People don't carry weapons in diners unless they know monsters are real. "How many others?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the hum of fluorescent lights. "How many people have bought their houses?" Caleb's jaw flexed once. "Too many." The way he said it, I could tell he carried them with him. Names, faces, probably screams too. He leaned forward now. Voice, a whisper. "Sunflower Realty doesn't exist. Not the way you think. They don't advertise online. No website, no phone book listing. They don't have to. They find you. The desperate ones. The ones who'll do anything for a fresh start. You ever wonder why the price was that good? Why it seemed to fall into your lap like it was meant for you?" I didn't have to answer. We both knew the truth. I'd practically walked into their arms. For the next 2 hours, Caleb explained things to me that I didn't want to believe. The blue sunflower logo wasn't just a mark of ownership. It was bait. Every person who bought a house through them, whether by accident, misfortune, or manipulation, had been chosen. Not by a company, not by people, by something else. "They're not houses," Caleb said flatly. "Not anymore. They're mouths, openings to somewhere else, somewhere that eats. You signed your name on that paper, you gave it permission." Permission to what? I didn't want to know. But I was starting to understand why the floorboards in my house didn't creak, why the walls seemed to breathe. It wasn't just bad plumbing or cheap construction. It was alive, and it was waiting. Caleb told me about others, people who disappeared, people who tried to fight it. The lucky ones left town before it could finish with them. The unlucky ones. Ever heard about the missing families on the edge of town? Caleb asked, his voice cold. The ones people whisper about, but never report? That's them. The sunflower houses don't like letting go. I felt like vomiting. The air tasted metallic like blood or battery acid. The edges of my vision pulsed. "There's got to be a way to break the contract," I said desperately. "To undo it." Caleb met my eyes. "That's why I'm still alive. I'm trying." That was when he told me about the others. "They meet once a month," Caleb explained. "Used to be just me and one other. Now there's 7 of us. All of us with stories. all of us with marks. Marks? Without speaking, he rolled up his left sleeve. I flinched. Etched across his forearm were faint, curling lines. Not tattoos, not scars in the traditional sense. It looked like someone had pressed the impression of a sunflower against his skin and branded it, not with heat, but with absence. It wasn't raised. It wasn't burned. It was hollow, flesh-shaped like petals, curling outward from a perfectly circular center. I touched my own forearm without thinking. Nothing. Yet. They start showing after the first week, Caleb said quietly. That's how you know the house isn't going to let you go. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and tear that blue sunflower sign off my house and throw it into traffic. But more than anything, I wanted to wake up. Because this couldn't be real. I was a nobody. A tired worker with a busted car and overdue bills. Nightmares were supposed to happen to people on the news, not to people like me. But that was the trick, wasn't it? People like me were exactly who they hunted for. Where do you meet? I asked, voice hoarse. Caleb stood, tossing a crumpled $5 bill on the table. Tonight. Old church basement on Milton. Don't be late. I don't remember the drive to that old church. What I do remember was that halfway there, I started seeing them. Blue petals, not whole flowers, just fragments, stuck to stop signs, curled in the corners of windows, drifting like confetti through intersections. No one else seemed to notice, not the people in passing cars, not the dog walkers along cracked sidewalks. But I did. By the time I pulled up to the church, they were everywhere. The meeting was in the basement. I recognized Caleb immediately, but it wasn't the 7 he mentioned. There were at least 15 people in that flickering room, all sitting on folding chairs, all holding their arms close to their bodies like they were hiding wounds. I recognized that look. Survivors. Victims. Both. They told me their stories in whispers. Stories of black flowers blooming behind drywall, of basements that didn't exist, until they fell through the floors into them. Of family members who started humming in their sleep and then never waking up. One woman, Alice, told me about her son. Bought her house last spring. Never thought anything of the logo on the paperwork. The boy had been humming that same low, tuneless sound I'd heard upstairs in my own nightmare. One morning, he wasn't in bed. No broken locks, no open windows, just a black sunflower painted perfectly on the mattress where his head had been. Another. Man, Darren, talked about how he started bleeding from the nose every time he walked into his kitchen. No doctors could explain it. By the 3rd week, he stopped eating. The 4th week, his right hand started curling into a claw, petals imprinted under the fingernails. We're not homeowners, Caleb said bitterly. We're offerings. The room went silent after that, but there was a plan. Not a good one, not a sure one, but a desperate, half-broken thread of hope was better than nothing at all. The contract ties to the symbol, Caleb explained, pacing the room. The sunflower isn't just a brand, it's a seal. If we break the seal, we break the connection. How? I asked, the weight of it all pressing down on me like ocean depth. Burn it? Caleb shook his head. Tried that. Paints itself. Back. Cuts itself into the walls, into the pipes, even into reflections. You can't destroy the mark. He paused, eyes narrowing. But you can replace it. That was the heart of the plan. Not removal. Replacement. Overlaying the sunflower with something else. Something older. Something stronger. They used symbols to get in, Caleb said, voice steady. We'll use symbols to lock them out. And that's when I saw the symbols. He unzipped a battered duffel bag, pulling out old, cracked boards covered in hand-drawn glyphs. Circles, intersecting lines, shapes that hurt my eyes if I stared at them too long. They don't like these, he whispered. It won't kill them, but it'll make them leave. Or so we hoped. That night, we moved in pairs. Caleb went with me. We parked 3 blocks away from my new house, both of us carrying worn satchels filled with symbols on parchment, charcoal sticks for fresh markings, and more salt than I'd ever seen outside a restaurant kitchen. As we crept up to the porch, I realized something that nearly sent me running back to the car. The house was humming, not loud, not angry, just faint, like someone softly singing under their breath. The door wasn't locked. I don't know if that made it better or worse. Inside, the temperature dropped 10 degrees immediately. My breath fogged. The shadows moved before we did, curling, like smoke across the ceiling, forming spirals that always ended in that same sunflower shape. But we kept moving. Living room first, then kitchen, then the 2 spare bedrooms, finally the room upstairs, the one with the painted black sunflower, except it wasn't black anymore. It was blue, bright, shimmering, pulsing like a vein of electricity under the skin of the house. And worse, the petals were moving, slow, opening, unfolding outward like the first breath of something waking up hungry. Caleb stepped forward. He didn't hesitate. I don't know how. His hands moved fast, drawing a complex pattern over the top of the sunflower. I recognized pieces of the symbols from the church basement. Circles folding into triangles, intersected with harsh, stabbing lines. The hum changed. Lower, angrier. The walls rippled. Drywall flexing outward like the house itself was breathing against us. I pressed the parchment symbols onto the corners of the room like Caleb showed me. Salt poured in thick lines across the doorway, the windows, the seams in the floor. And then, just as I laid the last piece down, it stopped. Not like a sound being muted, more like a voice cut mid-scream. The walls sagged. The sunflower, blue, shining, terrible, cracked like glass. Lines spread outward from the center, shattering the impossible paint job into curling, flaking sheets. Then, silence. Real silence. For the first time since I'd set foot in that house, it didn't feel like something was waiting just out of sight, licking its teeth. We didn't celebrate. We didn't say a word. We just walked out of that house like we were leaving a funeral. 2 days later, I checked my arms. Nothing. No marks. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe normally. But that night, I had a dream. Not of the sunflower. Of something. You can burn a house to the ground, but you can't burn a doorway once it's opened. We thought we were fighting real estate nightmares. But what we were fighting wasn't built of bricks or wood. It was ancient, and it was hungry, and we'd just made it angry. I didn't wake up screaming, not this time, but I did wake up cold, breathless, slick with sweat, like I'd been pulled out of a lake. That spiral, I couldn't get it out of my head. Unlike the sunflower, it didn't bloom. Outward, it pulled, and that whisper, low, deliberate, patient, like a predator waiting for you to exhaust yourself, had said one thing I couldn't ignore. You locked one door, but not the others. I sat on the edge of my mattress, staring at the warped shadows stretching across my room as the sunrise fought to creep through the broken blinds. I didn't want to think about the dream. I didn't want to think about Caleb or the old church basement or the crackling blue sunflower logo now smeared in blackened strips across my bedroom floor. I didn't want to think about the others. But I knew I didn't have a choice anymore. We thought the sunflower was the enemy. We were wrong. It was a warning, and we had ignored it. The meeting that week was supposed to be a regroup. It wasn't. I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into the cracked parking lot behind the church and saw that the door to the basement was already open. No one in that group left doors open, especially not after dark. I stepped inside carefully. The smell hit me first. Damp, iron-rich, metallic, blood. I moved down the stairs slowly, every footstep creaking louder than I wanted. The flickering basement. Bulbs buzzed. but only about half were working, casting long, broken shadows across the folding chairs we'd gathered in the last time I was here. The chairs were empty. The floor wasn't. Someone had written something across the concrete in blood, not painted, not written with a brush. Smeared, as though a hand, or worse, had dragged open wounds across the floor to make the letters. 3 words: the spiral beneath. I turned around so fast I nearly fell. I wasn't alone anymore. I could feel it, and then I saw him, Caleb, propped against the wall, alive, but barely. His face was pale, shirt torn, sleeve rolled back to reveal that mark on his forearm, but now it had changed. The sunflower was gone. In its place was the spiral, perfect, precise, like a symbol on an ancient coin, curling into itself like the iris of a blind eye. It made my stomach twist just looking at it. "They're not houses," Caleb rasped, blood running from the corner of his mouth. "Not just houses." "What the hell does that mean?" He coughed, a dry, barking sound. "They're openings. The sunflower keeps them shut. That's why it's always there, not bait, not ownership. A seal. The spiral's what's underneath." I couldn't breathe. The room tilted. "What's underneath?" His gaze locked on mine, and I'll never forget the way his voice cracked when he whispered, "Them." It was Alice, who found us first. The woman from the last meeting. Her brown hair now tangled, streaked with something dark. Maybe blood, maybe dirt. "I didn't care. I was just glad someone else was alive." "They're gone," she said breathlessly. "Darren, the Thompsons, all of them. I heard screaming. By the time I got here..." Her voice trailed off. Caleb tried to stand, but staggered. I caught him under one shoulder, feeling how light he was, like something had taken more than just blood from him, like he was hollow. "They're going for the houses," he gasped. "One by one, spirals under every floor. We thought the sunflower was the curse. It was the warning label." Alice's eyes were wild. "What do we do?" And I don't know why I said it. I don't know where the words came from, but I said them anyway. "We go to the first house." Alice blinked. "What?" "The first one," I said, jaw clenched. "The first sunflower house, where it started." Caleb looked at me like I'd just spoken something forbidden. "No one's seen it in years." "Then we find it." I wasn't brave. I wasn't special. I was desperate. And desperation makes you do impossible things. We stole the records from the town archives 2 hours later. Alice knew someone at City Hall who could get us in. A janitor who owed her a favor or two. By midnight, we were knee-deep in mildew-stained property files, blueprints, and ancient deeds written on paper so brittle. It flaked when you touched it. That's when we found it. The first deed stamped with the blue sunflower logo wasn't digital. It was handwritten. And older than we thought, date of sale, 1927. Buyer's name, illegible, location, Old Route 6, near Blackwater Pines. I didn't know that road. Alice did. Her hands were shaking as she held the paper up to the light. They built. The reservoir over Blackwater Pines. Caleb's face drained of color. That's why no one's found it. It's underwater. That's when I realized something worse. The spirals weren't just appearing in the houses. They were coming from beneath them, from under the ground. And under the ground at Blackwater Pines. The first house, the original opening, we hadn't locked. The door. We just rattled the handle. We didn't have a boat. What we did have was a friend of Alice's, another survivor of the sunflower properties. Greg, early 40s, reeked of gasoline and bad life decisions, but he had a fishing boat. "Something's moving down there," Greg muttered as we coasted out over the still black water of the old reservoir that night. "Has been for weeks. My anchor caught on something once, thought it was a log. Then I saw it move." Caleb was nearly catatonic, but I could see the old fire flicker behind his ruined eyes. The spiral on his arm was growing. "It's not just water," Caleb said. leaned over the edge of the boat, peering down into that black mirror. That's when I saw them, not reflections. Not fish, petals, blue ones, drifting up from the black like bloated flowers from a sunken garden, and beneath those petals, a shape, angular, too square to be natural. A roof. The first house was still down there, and it was awake. Alice held the old glyph boards across her lap, her knuckles white. If we get close enough, I can mark it. I don't know if it'll work through the water, but the boat jolted, not from a wave, from underneath. Greg cursed, rushing to the motor, gunning it hard. The reservoir screamed with the engine's whine, but the boat only moved a few feet before another jolt hit us. Something wasn't trying to sink us, it was pulling. I looked back at Caleb. He wasn't breathing. His eyes were wide, mouth open, hands clawed against his chest. And that spiral on his arm, it wasn't on his skin anymore. It was leaving him, curling upward in faint, glowing lines like heat shimmer in the air, peeling away from his flesh in transparent, twisting tendrils. It wasn't a symbol anymore. It was a hole. The water under us began bubbling, not like boiling, but breathing. And then the humming started again. Not from the boat, not from us, from underneath. The first house wasn't just awake, it was calling. We didn't make it to shore. Something dragged the boat sideways, smashing us against a submerged shape, probably the peak of the old house's roof, jutting up just under the surface. The impact sent Greg flying backward into the motor. I heard something snap. He screamed once, then didn't scream again. Alice grabbed me by the wrist, eyes wild. "The symbols! Help me!" We pulled the boards out, laying them across the rim of the boat, the ink and charcoal already starting to run with the splash of water lapping at our feet. It wasn't enough. It was laughable. A child's crayon drawing trying to stop a train, and then I saw the spiral. Not just the one on Caleb's ruined arm, but down below, through the water, carved into the roof of the house itself, a massive spiral curling across the ancient shingles like a giant black fingerprint pressing outward. And from its center, I saw it. Not a face, not a creature, an eye, huge, pale, rimmed in petals, watching us, watching me. The humming grew, vibrating through my bones. The spiral wasn't just pulling me under, it was inviting me. And I realized as my breath caught in my throat, as Alice screamed, as the reservoir broke into concentric rings like someone stirring a spoon through ink. I'd seen that eye before. In my dream. You locked one door, but not the others. And this was the front door. Not all doors open outward. Some open inward, into places the human mind was never meant to see. We thought we were keeping things out. We were wrong. We were keeping something in. Darkness isn't always the absence of light. Sometimes it's the presence of something else. That's what I felt when the spiral opened beneath the water. Not the absence of illumination, but the presence of something deeper than darkness. Something not made for human eyes. The spiral wasn't an entrance. It was a mouth. And we had just stepped onto its tongue. Alice was screaming my name, her hands slick with lake water as she fought to hold the glyph boards in place. The ink ran, in greasy streaks, the symbols deforming, as if the water itself was rejecting their lines. Greg was gone, maybe alive, maybe not. But in that moment, I knew the reservoir wasn't a lake anymore. It was a wound, and the house beneath us, a scab. Being peeled away, I couldn't let that happen. I didn't care if I drowned. I didn't care if the spirals took me. All I knew was that if that thing opened fully, it wasn't just going to take me, it was going to take everything. Alice and I worked in a blur of panic, shoving the boards over the edge of the boat, letting them float like makeshift runes around the growing whirlpool. But the boards weren't enough. "It needs a binder," Alice shouted. "A living anchor or the glyphs won't hold." My stomach dropped. Caleb. Where was Caleb? I turned, and I'll never forget what I saw next. Caleb was standing, but not by his own strength. Something beneath the yadi. Water was holding him upright. His arms stretched outward, eyes rolled white, mouth open in silent scream as that spiral peeled itself fully from his arm and floated above his chest in glowing, translucent lines. And behind him, rising from the eye beneath the spiral, was something vast, a shape, not human, not even animal, something older, wrong, like a cathedral built by blind architects with too many fingers and too few bones. It wasn't swimming, it was emerging. We had minutes, maybe seconds. Alice knew it too. She grabbed my wrist. "We can bind it. The glyphs will hold if someone anchors them." But she didn't finish. She didn't need to. The anchor wouldn't survive. "I'll do it," I said hoarsely. "No," Alice snapped. "You don't know the marks." I opened my mouth to argue, but Caleb moved first. He spoke, not with his lips, with the spiral, a whisper in the water, the sound of drowning breath, the syllables of something old, something that shouldn't have human meaning. But I understood. It anyway, the way you understand the sound of thunder even if you don't speak its language. "I will bind," he said, and then his body folded, not broken, not torn, just folded inward, like origami made of flesh and bone, as if he was willingly becoming part of the spiral itself. A sacrifice, voluntary, the glowing spiral inverted, curling, into itself like the pupil of an enormous eye, contracting in sudden focus. The hum rose in pitch, sharp, agonizing, and then the glyphs caught fire, not flame exactly, but light, brilliant white arcs that cut through the water like spears through smoke. The whirlpool stopped. The humming stopped. For 1 second, the surface of the reservoir went perfectly, terribly still. Then, with a horrible, echoing snap, the spiral sealed. Alice collapsed forward, gasping. I nearly followed her, but I caught myself against the side of the boat, blinking hard against. The afterimage of that impossible spiral burned into my retinas. It was over, or at least this part was over. The first house, the one beneath the reservoir, was locked again, bound, sealed by Caleb's sacrifice, by the burning glyphs, now nothing more than charred driftwood floating in the ink-black water. But the eye was still down there, watching, waiting. And I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that we hadn't won. Not really. We just bought time. I looked at Alice. Her eyes met mine. We didn't need to speak. There are other houses, other spirals, other doors, and we had work to do. The sunflower wasn't a brand, it was a warning, a symbol of defiance. And now I wear that symbol on my arm, tattooed bright blue. A promise: keep the doors closed or die trying.